So on this episode of the podcast, we have Nico. He has an amazing story of going from weed and alcohol to then opiate-based pills to then heroin and pushing loads of his own boundaries. And that's one thing that really stood out to me is how we set these boundaries in addiction that we'll never cross that, I'll never get that bad, I'll never go past that line that we drew for ourselves in the sand, but we just blast past each one over and over and over and over again. Me and Nico got into all of that and so many other great things. So I'm looking forward to you listening to the episode, and let's dive right in. Welcome to the show, Nico.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I wonder if you could get us started by just telling us a bit about your background and your own story of addiction.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. Background, let's see, kind of hit the major demographics real fast. I'm in my 30s, single male from America, born and raised in a two-parent household. And my drugs of choice, substances of choice were alcohol and opiates. I started using when I was 14 years old and continued using until I was about 27. So for the majority of my adult life, I depended on some sort of substance to kind of keep me what I call balance, kind of get me through the day, to kind of center me is what I would use it for. It took some deep background work to figure out why I use substances. And for me, those substances came from emotions of abandonment, emotions of feeling alone, and emotions of wanting to be accepted. Give you guys even more in depth. When I was 2 years old, my sister was born, and within her first year, she had some medical issues. So my grandparents took responsibility of me for a little bit of time. So I spent a lot of time with my grandma and my papa. We would travel from New Mexico to Arizona. We were going back and forth. So I got introduced to life through the older generation, which I find very valuable myself. But when I dug into my own issues, I realized that was a stem of, or root, I should say, of where the abandonment started, because I was wondering, why the heck do I have to go and spend time with my grandparents all the time, and my sister gets to spend time with my family? I had no idea about all the medical issues at that time.
Yeah. How old were you at this time? What kind of age were you?
2 years old. Yeah, I was about 2 years old when that started happening. And that lasted until I was about 6 years old. When I was 6, my papa got really sick and he passed away. So it wasn't as viable for my grandparents to watch me anymore, just because it was my grandma only. And so I started to spend a lot more time with my parents. And about that age, you start to go into school. So, went to spend time with my parents and go to school. So from about 6 to, I would say 12, I had a pretty normal, what you would call, upbringing. Go to school, go home, get disciplined for getting into fights, get disciplined for lashing out, being a rebellious young man, that type of stuff. And then there was also, in that window of time, that 6 years, there was some experiences that I had that I don't think children should have. There were some situations that happened to me that I just don't think most kids should have to deal with. Mine mainly stemmed from some sort of abuse, sexual abuse, that happened by a family member. And so that caused to me to feel even more like an outsider, more like a abandoned young man. And then when I was 14, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at that early age, even rewinding a bit to your granddad, right? He passed away when you were 6. And he was one of your main caregivers from like 2 to 6 years old. How do you think it was as the 6-year-old you to lose your grandparent or one of your main caregivers?
It was horrible. That was another concept that I had no idea about, right? Death at that age, you're not really understanding, well, he's sick and now he goes away and he's never coming back. So that also put another nail in the coffin of, you know what, you're being abandoned again.
Yeah. And like you said, that was hard for you to even understand and conceptualize at that age. I lost my mum at 10. And yes, there's a massive age gap between 6 and 10. A lot happens in those years. But when you lose someone close to you at an early age, it can be difficult to make sense of that and understand what it means and why this happened and really understand it. It can be challenging.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the best tips anybody can take, right? And start doing some self-work, start digging into your history, start understanding why you think the way that you think. Because if you can start to understand your thoughts and then you can sit outside of your thoughts, you can make a conscious decision whether those thoughts are ones that you want to have, thoughts you don't want to have, or a way of thinking, a pattern of thinking that you want to continue having.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to get into all of the mindset stuff and the thinking and going back and how you worked on some of this stuff. That's so important. I want to get to that in the episode, 100% in this conversation, right? But in the here and now, I want to focus on, like you said, when you were going to school and you experienced some of that sexual abuse. What was that like for you?
It was intense would be one word for it. Another word for it would be very helpless. Those are two words that stand out. But our mind is so cool that it blocked a lot of that stuff until I hit about 14. Just your mind protects you. So that's how I felt. And it was a family member, so you still had to see them, right? Like there was still events that they were around, and that was interesting.
Yeah.
That made me feel insecure for sure.
Yeah, and did you tell anyone or did you keep it to yourself for many years? How was it?
I kept it to myself for many years, so I didn't start talking about it until later in my 20s. And even then, the people around me were like, okay, stuff like that happens. It's kind of just like brush it off, get over it, grow up.
Yeah. And how was it to finally start to talk about it after all those years and people just, virtually say, Nico, brush it off?
That was difficult um, to to get that response. It was difficult to even bring up the topic. It felt like um, there was a constant pressure just on my mind about it. And the only time that I could relieve that pressure is when I discussed it. And when I discussed it, people didn't want to hear about it. So that pressure just continued to build. And it continued to force itself more and more, driving me into the solutions that I had created, right? And for me, those solutions that I had created was drinking, using substances, and continuing to manage life like that.
Yeah, because you said that about 14 was when some of these feelings and emotions and thoughts and memories came up for you around the different circumstances and trauma in your life. And that was also the same sort of time you started using and, drinking and that kind of stuff. Tell us a bit more about how you got into drugs and drink and how that soothed some of that pain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's the exploration years. You're still finding yourself right about that age. For me, I had moved into a different school district, and to be accepted around a group that was willing to accept me, using substances was pretty common. So I had participated in athletics most of my life. From about age 7, I started wrestling. And as long as I could wrestle, that was one of my outlets. That was one of the positive outlets that I had. But wrestling season was only a couple months long. It was from right now, November until February, which is 3-4 months. So the rest of the 8 months out of the year, I was trying to figure out ways to calm my mind, ways to make my brain function in a way that I could actually feel like I wasn't racing. My mind was always racing on things. It was going so fast paced. It was always trying to make the next best decision. It was always looking for another problem to solve. It was always looking for another group to be accepted by, that it would do anything and everything. And that's how I approached the world. So hanging around individuals who were willing to accept me, they were a little bit off themselves, and seeing that substances such as cannabis, that was the first one, where like one of the ways that they solve their problems, I figured if it solved their problems, then it'll solve my problem too. And I remember the first time that I got high, we had ditched school. I was about 14 years old. So that's here in America, that's the 9th grade. And when I ditched school, I was taken to a house and we got a gravity bong. We put a gallon together in a big old cooler and we put a socket on top of the gallon and we smoked some cannabis that way. And I remember, oh man, this is making life understandable. This is making my brain slow down. This is making it so that I could actually function a little bit better. And at that point, I was hooked. I wanted to feel that feeling all the time. And so I did. Anytime I got the chance to smoke cannabis, I would. Anytime that I got a chance to get high, I would. And from there, I had to pay for it, right? So I learned how to hustle too. I would take my lunch money. I was blessed, like I said, my parents would give me a couple bucks for lunch money. So I'd save it all week. And then I would buy a pack of primetime small cigars and I would resell those out to earn me some extra money. So by the time I had done that a few times, I had a system down, and that system created the opportunity for me to pay for my own substances. And so I was smoking cannabis from age 14, probably till about age 16. And then other substances started to become involved.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that story of selling the cigars. Very, very similar. Something happened to me, in school. We used to buy a pack of cigarettes, and you used to be able to buy them in the UK for like £2.50 for 10, and you sell them for like £1 each. You double your money every single day, and then I'd take that money to buy like alcohol or buy something from the packed lunch shop or from the sweets and all that kind of stuff. And I'll just flip the cigarettes every morning. It was like a bit like a goal, right? Before the day starts, you have to sell all of these 10 to get the money you need and to hustle. And we're so creative and clever, even as, if you want to call, like I call myself like an addict, right? We're so clever, we're so functioning, we're so on the ball, we've got like so much potential. And even at those early ages, we're still hustling and doing things. So it's amazing to hear that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just speaks to the problem solving. It speaks to the innovative thought processes that we have, just even at that age. Because exactly what you said, taking them and selling them to get what you needed done is exactly what we were doing on my end too.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And as time went on and you started to go through life, when did drink and drugs start to become a bit of a problem? When did you know things were sort of getting out of hand?
Mm. Well, one of the first issues that I realized I had was I thought that drugs were the solution for money problems too. I had that long-term vision that, hey, this probably isn't going to last. So when I was 17, I gave up a full ride wrestling scholarship that I had to go to college, that I earned, and I decided that I was just going to sell drugs the rest of the time. Now, in addition to selling drugs, I always worked. So I had a part-time job as a construction worker, about that same age. So I figured I had life all sorted out. Well, the Oxycontin had just hit the market. This is early 2000s, so 2007. Oxycontin had really entered the market, and people were using it pretty heavily. And I had found a way to get hundreds of those on a consistent basis by bartering. So I trade one substance to an individual for their Oxycontin, then I sell the Oxycontin for cash, and I pay off the person that gave me the original drugs. One night I am laying in bed because I broke one of the rules of the game. You're not supposed to use what you sell. Get high on your own supply is not something that you're supposed to do. But because I had learned to rely on substances, and the amount of substances and type of substances started to escalate, I started getting high on my own supply. And I thought because I had hundreds of them, it wasn't going to be a big deal, right? A couple here, a couple there. It's not going to hurt any profit. It's not going to hurt anything, but it hurt me. So I'm laying in bed one night and I can feel just in my hand this ache. It feels like there was a stake being driven in between my bones, on my left hand. And I was like, this is horrible. What the heck is going on? And I had realized that I hadn't taken any oxys for the past couple of days. And I was like, oh, shoot, I guess this is what withdrawals are called. So I'm laying in my bed, about 17, 18 years old. And I'm like, okay, you're hooked. You're hooked on this Oxycontin. So you better make sure that you don't ever feel this again. And that means increasing your supply. So I continued to increase my supply, but they changed the way that it was manufactured. And the second time that I realized that I really had a problem and I struggled with addiction um, was one of my colleagues, one of my buddies. I had been out of Oxycontin for a little bit, and I told him I was hurting. My whole arm was feeling like there was spikes and needles going through it, just onset symptoms of small withdrawals. And he's like, well, I got something that can help you out. I just don't know if you're willing to take it or not. I was like, well, what is it? Because I'm pretty willing to take anything right now. And he showed me some black tar heroin. He said, if you smoke this, then you'll feel better. It's the exact same stuff, just in a less pure form. I was like, all right, let's test it out. So I smoked freebase some heroin, and that one solved my problem again. Now, consciously, I knew that this wasn't the best choice, but subconsciously, I knew that I needed to solve this problem of not feeling the way that I felt. So that was one of the first instances that I knew I was hooked. One of the third steps was I was living in an apartment. This girl that I was seeing, hanging out with, we were using together. She said, you know, you're wasting a lot of money by smoking your heroin. If you inject it, you get a lot further high than you do by smoking it. I was like, all right, let's give it a shot. Because if I could save some money and I can get higher, I'm all about that. And so she taught me how to shoot up again in my left hand. It's weird how it all kind of just stems into one place, drives into one place. But yeah, she taught me how to shoot up. And I remember getting high IV injection for the first time about 20 years old. And from there, I got evicted from that apartment because financially I wasn't managing my money. Got told that I couldn't stay at my family's house. Both my mom and my dad were like, no, you're messed up. So you can't stay here. My sister, I have a younger sister, like I shared earlier, she told me she didn't want to be around me. And a couple of guys that I grew up around, they said, don't come around anymore. So those were some very big indicators that I had an issue with opiates. Now, I kicked opiates cold turkey, just white knuckled it when I was about age 22. And legally, alcohol was always around. So I started drinking. And that's when my addiction mentality repeated itself, because instead of using opiates, I was now drinking. And that escalated very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is a lot of us, and maybe you said this as well, you can let me know in a second, right? But lots of people say, I'm never going to get that far, right? I'll never inject heroin, I'm just taking these pills, I'm just smoking a few joints, it's not really a gateway drug, that's bullshit. That doesn't matter. And then, like you say, then you start taking the pills, and then you're like, okay, these are opiate based. Wait a minute, I can't just stop the pills. I'm having withdrawals. Then your friend suggests the heroin, and then you take the heroin, and then, like you say, that girl suggests injecting. You're like, oh, that makes sense. I mean, when you look back at those boundaries slowly getting pushed, did you yourself think, when you're smoking a few joints, oh, I'd never do heroin, I'd never be one of those people? Did you think that?
Oh, absolutely. I used to make fun of those people, right? Because at the time of working and at the time of using, I was also selling so that I could get high for free. And I would see people 100 pounds who used to be 180 pounds doing everything that they could, from robbing to selling themselves to get high. And I was like, oh, yeah, that won't ever be me. That won't ever be me. I'll just pop these pills. I'll just smoke them. And then when I started IV injecting, I was like, well, at least I'm not reusing needles. And then I found myself reusing needles. And I was like, well, at least I got a place to stay. And then I didn't have a place to stay any longer. And that thought process of, no, I'll never get that bad. When we push our boundaries, when we push what we're willing to do, we also push back that next level, right? Because if you were to measure backwards and look at it from the time when I first shot up, that wouldn't have ever crossed my mind ever in my early use days. But because I continued to push the boundaries of what I was using, continued to push the boundaries of what I was willing to do, that allowed these other boundaries to be moved further. So if you're always moving these marks that you have for your life, then they're always going to keep on moving it, and you're never going to recognize that you have crossed your own lines. When you cross your own lines, that's when you start to lose yourself. That's what I think one of the biggest things about addiction is that you lose your own boundaries. You lose trust in yourself. And when you lose those boundaries and we lose trust in yourself, well, then everything's to the wind. There's nothing that's off the table for you.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, we push the boundaries more and more and more. And, a lot of the clients I work with and speak to say, I'll never be like that. I'm still functioning, I'm still fine, I still have a job. Exactly like what you've said, and I've said it myself, many times, that won't happen to me, I won't get that bad. And then like I say, we just push the boundaries more and more and more. And then we turn around and look and we're like, fuck, how did we get here? Right? How did it get this bad? And like I say, for you, it was like when you got kicked out and the people around you started to move away from you and distance themselves from you and your family and friends. What was that like at that point when you were not only losing yourself and the trust in yourself, but then started losing the people around you? How was that?
Oh, that really pushed me over the edge with those feelings of abandonment, those feelings of insecurities, those feelings of change happening all around me. So I'm trying to avoid change. So what I do is, what's my most constant thing? Well, the most constant thing is getting high to avoid the realization that change is happening. So it made me feel more abandoned. It made me feel more like I was being victimized. It made me feel more like I was being targeted. It made me feel like I was the only one in this grand world dealing with this one thing. That's what it made me feel like. And I would play into those thoughts. I'd play into the thought pattern that said, "Yep, you are the only one that's ever had to be kicked out. You are the only one that's ever had to be isolated by your friends. You're the only one that has this social distancing." And the reality is, it's not. There's thousands of us that we're going through that. It's millions of people that struggle with that on a constant basis. And it's, people would say, well, at least you still got your family. At least you still got a place to live. At least you still got a job. Because I would lose trust in myself, I would lose my own standards. Other people's standards were then pressed upon me, right? So because I was hanging around with people who were using that didn't have jobs, they were like, "Oh, well, you're good. You still have your job." I was hanging around people who didn't have a vehicle, right? So they tell me, "Oh, you're good. You have a vehicle," and that's that's it's sad to say, but that's the deeper I got into addiction, the lower the standards got set, especially with the people that were around me. And so, because I wasn't around a caring group of individuals who had my best interests, who set the boundaries for me, I started to associate, because I had this fear of not being in a group. I had this fear of not being accepted from my abandonment issues, that I would go to whoever accepted me. I'd go and spend time with whoever let me. And it tended to be individuals who I had a little bit more than, right? Because in their head, they hung out with me, then they had a little bit more too. Because Nico has a car, so he could take us to go get the dope. He could take us to go get the drink. Nico still has a job, so there's still some sort of income coming in there that we could bum if we need to. And because of my need to be around individuals, my need to feel group, which is a natural human need. I'm not trying to diminish that. Like, community is super important. But what type of community are you surrounding yourself with? Is there needs to be a standard there. And that allowed me to drop my standards. That's how it made me feel. But it really just brought up those emotions of abandonment again, brought up the problem that, hey, Nico, you're by yourself and all these people just want to take advantage of you. It brought up the problem of, well, you're right, because this is the only way that you know how to solve your problem. And I was right. That was the only way I knew how to solve my problem, because I was so ignorant and arrogant and stubborn that I chose not to go get some help on how to deal with these issues.
Yeah. And the thing is that I recognize is that abandonment, like you say, that part of abandonment, but in my experience, and maybe it's similar for you, is that drugs and drink don't abandon you, right? They're always there. Whenever you shoot up that heroin, you smoke that joint, you drink that drink, doesn't abandon you. It's always there. Every time you push that button, so to speak, right, you get the hit. It's always your friend, and it becomes like a relationship, right? An abusive relationship where it's always there for you, just using it over and over again. It always kind of meets your needs. It doesn't ever leave, and it just kind of get pushed into more of that, the hands of the drug and the drink and all of those things. And also, like you say, the people around you, you get more isolated from the people who love you and more pushed into the people who aren't good for you, who aren't being a bit good influence, who are lowering your standards more and more and more.
Absolutely, Luke. I like the way that you said that it never leaves you. And that's one of the things that I think really helped me out, was understanding that it's always going to be there. There's always going to be some sort of drugs. There's always going to be some sort of drink. There's always going to be some sort of substance out there. But this day that we're getting to enjoy, even this time that me and you get to spend right now, this isn't always going to be there. This day, we're on the 31st day of, for me, I should say, it's the 31st day of the 10th month, 2023. This day is not going to be there forever. It's going to pass. So what are you going to do with it? And I think that was for sure at a attractive portion of drinking and using substances, was that it was always there. And no matter how bad it got, I could always go to getting high to escape.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, you went cold turkey off the heroin, which was amazing. Well done. That's like a massive achievement. And then you kind of moved on to drinking, if you like. What happened then? How did things go from the drinking? Where did things lead?
Well, they seemed to go all right at the beginning, because there was a rule that everybody had kind of put in place around me, that as long as you're not using drugs, then we'll be around you, right? My family had started to re-accept me. The social groups that I was around started to accept me a little bit more, because I wasn't always nodding off. I wasn't walking around with cysts on my body. So at that point, it seemed to be going well. We'd go out, we'd have drinks, we'd have party. But because of the way that I functioned, very much an extremist, if one drink makes you feel good, then 10 drinks are going to make you feel amazing. And so I would drink 10 drinks and end up blacking out, end up acting a fool. And so because my behaviors hadn't really changed, just the substance had changed, the same cycle repeated itself. Social isolation, family kicked me out again. And individuals that I was once around no longer wanted me to be around them. And it was because, Nico, you're drinking too much. You smell like liquor all the time. I'd show up to work with, we have these tall drinks, they're called Polar Pops. And I'd fill half of it with a pint and then the other half with some soda. And I just walk into work like that. I worked at a call center, so I'd sit down and I'd drink. And people would be like, Nico, you reek like alcohol. Oh, that was just from last night. So the standard again started to redrop. It was the exact same process, just with a different substance. And this one was legal. So in my head, because it was legal, no one should have an issue with it. Well, yeah, just because a substance is legal doesn't mean that you should be using it. Just because they say it's okay for some individuals, it's not okay for all individuals, or even to the excess that most individuals will take it. And so for me, that's what ended up happening. So by the time I'm 25, now 26, most people have stopped hanging out with me. Most people have stopped being around me. My job is just letting me, have a job, because it's, I'm helpful to them. I got the gift of gab. I could talk to many people. I could wit people into buying things over the phone. So they were happy that my numbers were at least being met. But I found myself living in a building that didn't have anything but electricity running through it. And I'm grateful for the electricity, because at least I could have my hot plate and some TV, which could put me out. But I was showering at the gym after I work out. I was only buying food for that night so I could just eat a little bit of something. And then the rest of the money went to alcohol. And I was drinking 2 bottles of rum every day at that point in time, just to kind of numb myself. And I realized, like, the issue isn't with the substances. The issue isn't with your environment. The issue isn't with all the stuff around you. The issue is you, bro. The issue is what's going on inside of your head. The issue is the way that you think about yourself. The issue is the way that you identify yourself. And in my community here in New Mexico, there's a very high poverty rate and a very low education rate. So most individuals drink. Most individuals use some sort of substance. The individuals who don't, honestly, Luke, they weren't individuals that I wanted to be like, because they had other vices, right? They just weren't substances. They were something other than that. And so I didn't want to be like them. And seeing that, I hadn't been exposed to, so I couldn't use my own imagination to create the individual that I would admire that didn't use any of that stuff. So that's what drinking did to me. For ages about 23 to 27, I would just drink on a constant basis. And it would start off with half a pint. I'd keep that in my vehicle, and I'd sip that when I was going out. If I had a date, then I'd make sure I had some drink before I went on my date. And at the date, there was, of course, going to be some sort of alcohol involved. So my life revolved around alcohol, not me, and my best interest.
Yeah. And as you were going through that journey and your drinking was kind of escalating, and was there any particular time that happened, any person or thing that happened that caused you to have like an awakening or an awareness and realize that you were repeating the pattern and it wasn't good? Like, when did you have that wake up call and start to change?
A wake up call came when I was about 26 years old, and all my family had told me that I couldn't be around them. But my grandma, she had already passed at this time, and my family kept the house that she lived in, and they said, you can go live there if you want to. Uh, and so that's where I ended up staying. That was the place that just had electricity in it. There was nothing else there, but her memory was there too. And that was electric itself. And so I'm sleeping in the middle of this house that I semi grew up in on a mattress, and I just have one of those hot plates that I'm cooking food on and a TV, and I'm dealing with this relationship issue where this girl, she wants to be around me, but she doesn't like who I currently am. And I'm just like, yo, Nico, you have a good job, but all your money goes to drinking. You show off exterior that seems like you're doing okay, but you're not. You weigh 260 pounds. You can barely breathe. You stink all the time. And what are you getting out of this? My sister and my family didn't want anything to do with me. And the ideals that I had for coming up on 30, they weren't anywhere close to being met. And I remember I was laying in this house drinking, and it was my 27th birthday. And I don't celebrate my birthday. I never have. It's not something that I participate in personally. But my mom and my sister wanted to hang out with me. And at the time, I was so paranoid and hallucinating that I had a gun on me. And I was sleeping with the bottle in one hand, the gun in the other hand. And I didn't know this, but my sister came into the house and she saw me laying there with the gun and the bottle, and it scared her. So she left the house. She called my mom, and I wake up to my mom like rubbing my arm that the gun's in so that she could hold it down when I wake up, because she knew that I was not in the right state of mind. And she said, son, you got to get up. And I kind of come out of my psychosis, my drinking passed out time, and I'm freaking out. But I remember how scared my sister looked. I remember how scared my mom looked. And that really put me in a place where I was just like, man, what kind of man are you, dude? Like, what kind of human are you that you cause this much fear without even saying anything? It's just that you're scaring them just by your behaviors. My mom tells me, I know you don't celebrate your birthday, but we're not going to let this stop us from celebrating you. And I was like, okay. So we got up and we went to go to this little taco joint, and we had some food. I could barely eat. The only thing on my mind was drinking. And it was just an uncomfortable situation. It was uncomfortable to be in. But I realized, like, you have a shot. You've seen enough people die around you. You've seen enough people overdose around you. You see enough people hurt around you. Because I was still in contact with some of the parents of the friends that I had lost. And I was like, you got this shot, and this is what you're doing with it. You're wasting your shot. How many of them would like to have their kid around? Like, how many people would like to have the one that they lost around them? And it was around that time that my decision making, my choice to change really happened. It was around that same time that the employer that I had, they told me I had to take a leave from work because I was drinking on the job too much. I was messing up. So it was a couple of events within about a 6-month window that made me decide that you have an opportunity. Are you going to waste it, or are you going to actually do something with it? And I decided to do something with it. I go back and they evaluate, my job evaluates me, and they say, hey, we'll give you another shot and we'll see what happens. I'm like, wow, well, since they're giving me another shot, let me not go ahead and blow this shot. And my employer also paid for school. So I went back to school. My employer had some other assisted programs that were able to help me out. And I started going to therapy about that time just to get this stuff off my chest. And there was therapists who were like, oh yeah, I've been there. Oh yeah, I've been there. And that started to make me think, okay, there's other people that have felt this way. So if they can do it, then you can do it too. And it took maybe about a year after that for me to stop drinking completely, like without having relapses, without having mess ups, without having those slip ups. And I got introduced to this guy named E.T., Dr. Eric Thomas. And his concept was that, you know what, you're not in control of a lot of things around you, but you are in control of what's in your mind. So I started taking his little nuggets and I started applying them to my day-to-day life, and ended up remodeling that house that I lived in with just the mattress on the floor. So I started to do tangible things that I had control over that was allowing me to change. I ended up getting a bachelor's degree for free soon after that. And then I wrote a book to help other people, because people saw a change in me that they're like, how did you do this? Like, we know that you were the heroin addict. We know that you were the alcoholic. We know that you had all these problems. So how are you now an author with a published book? So I just started telling people, you know, if you can change the way that you think about yourself, and you can imagine the individual that you want to be, like the individual that you would admire, that you would wake up excited to be, and aim for that every day, then you'll be able to achieve some grand things. And that's what started happening.
And for you, Nico, when you were just getting on that path of recovery, what were some of the things that really helped you? What tools did you use?
Tools that I use, well, we have these face gates, you know, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth. And I started protecting those. That was one of the first tools that I did. Like, things that went into my ear, they had to be positive. They couldn't be negative. Things that I was seeing, like I wasn't watching the same videos. I wasn't watching the same environments. Things that I would even say, I had to watch my speech. So that was one of the first tools that I used, was protecting my face gates at all possible costs. One of the other tools that I used for me was, some people call it religion, but I grew up in a household that taught the Bible, right? So I grabbed the Bible and I started just reading it. And I was like, well, if there's a God out there, there's something that created us that we didn't create, then let me talk to that. And I started communicating with God. For me, that was Jesus. And just having constant communication with somebody who I knew wasn't ever going to leave me, who I knew was always going to be around. That was another tool that I found. So I found my higher power. I found my creator, and I started communicating with my creator all the time. You mentioned it earlier. One of the best things about alcohol and substances was that they never left you. So I replaced that with something else that would never leave me. And that was, for me, one of the other great tools. The other thing that I did was I would change my physical state. Like, I would capture the thought of drinking, because they still come, right? It's not like they go away immediately when you make this decision. They actually kind of increase when you make this decision. But if you're always thinking, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to drink, you tend to go drink. If you start to think, you know, I'm somebody who doesn't drink, I'm somebody who takes a walk instead of drinking, that thought starts to become your new habit. Instead of taking a walk for drinking, I would do 10 push-ups. I would do 10 sit-ups. I would do 10 squats. So I'd physically change the way that I moved whenever the thoughts came around, because that same energy that I put towards going and getting high, going and drinking all the time, well, it just needed to be shifted. So I started to shift that energy. I started to shift those thoughts. I started to shift those actions, because that's what allowed me to actually shift my life. That would be one of the best tools that I found, was, you know, watching what I listened to, watching how I spoke about myself, watching what I watched, then making sure that I was around my creator on a constant basis, having communication with my creator, and then changing how I moved, literally how I moved. Like, I wasn't going around individuals that I used to go around. I wasn't taking the same drive home that I used to take, that has the gas station right there, the liquor store right there. I would take new paths to get home, so that I could change the way that I actually thought on my way home. I'd built so many habits subconsciously that my mind was so attracted to just following them. I had to change those. So those were three of the top tools that I did. And then the fourth one, I found community. I really found a community of individuals that I kind of put together on my own, that could hold me accountable. And that's the fifth tool, accountability. So if I could have accountability, I could have community, I could have replacement activities, I could have communication with something that wasn't ever going to leave me, and I could have control over what I could control, my senses, my thoughts. Those are the five tools that allowed me to really see significant change, sustainable change, change that was able to feel right. It was solving my problems, and it created new groups for me to be welcomed in.
Yeah, so like you say, protecting what came into your world, I think is really good how you phrased that and spoke about that, right? Thinking about our senses, what comes into our world, what are we allowing into it? Because like you said, when you were doing heroin, you weren't, and you were lowering your standards and you're allowing those people to come into your world, and you were going into other people's worlds, and you're all just kind of getting lower and lower and lower together, right? And you're getting fed by all of that negativity, all of the things they're saying and their low standards, and it just creates an echo chamber and like a spiral downwards. So they're two really important ones. What actually happens in terms of your senses, what comes into your senses, and also your peer group community, being held accountable, what people are holding you on track, like they're really amazing. And also changing your physical state, like I said, when you had those cravings, doing something physical, changing your physiology, going and doing some squats, getting your blood pressure up, getting your heart rate up, I mean, getting your blood pumping, really changing your physical state, because that calms down your mind. And lastly, like you said, the Bible, and finding Jesus. And that was one constant for you that never left, right? That never left, that will always be there, that really helps support and guide you to the place you need to be. So it sounds like you found some really, really good and solid tools.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it has opened up so many other doors, Luke. Like when I found that I'm sorry, let me say it this way. When I made those non-negotiables for me, when I made those my standards, uh, the world started to adjust to those standards that I had created, right? One of the things that I know happens is that when we set a standard for ourselves, the world is going to adapt to that standard. You're going to start to see that stuff all around. So if your standard is drinking, partying, using all the time, then guess what? You're going to see drinking, partying, and using all the time. But if your standard is now, you know what, behaving according to my own personal beliefs, behaving to the individual who I know I was created to be, then I'd start seeing opportunities to be that individual. I'd see people hurting. I'd see people going through withdrawals. I see people over drinking, and not force it, not Bible thump on them, but just be a kind human being to them. Smile. Be like, hey, how's your day going? Actually take some time to communicate with them. The things that I wanted somebody to do for me made my standard different. And when I found myself serving other people, helping other people, that's when I realized that I'd lose track of time. They call it flow state, but I'd lose track of time when I was helping other individuals. And I got addicted to that. It's a little bit selfish, right? But it's selfish in a good way, because if I can serve other people, then I can feel free. And that freedom is it's better than any dopamine hit I've ever had. That it's better than any type of high I've ever been on. When I can sit and talk to either groups, I can sit and talk with one person one-on-one, when I can create a video that's going to go out to the masses on the internet, to maybe help somebody, my brain feels free, my body feels lighter, and it's an amazing time.
Yeah, giving back is amazing, right? And helping people and supporting people. And also there's that empathy, right? After being through it yourself and making that amazing growth and that amazing shift, you have the empathy, right? Like even me, I don't judge someone who's in that madness. I'm like, I've been there too, right? I completely get it. I get that you're banging your head against the wall. I get that all this stuff's going on. Like it completely makes sense. So that you have that real empathy and understanding. But one thing along the way you mentioned is having some slips, right? Recovery is never in a straight line. We wish it would be, but it's just not. What was that like in the early days, some of the slips you had, and how did you handle that?
And the slips, they were interesting, because it's like you're being pulled in a tug of war. It's like someone has grip on one hand and they're pulling you towards help. They're pulling you towards a healthy lifestyle. They're pulling you towards a mental state that you know is good for you. But there's another grip on your other hand that's pulling you towards this comfort zone. And the slip for me was knowing that, hey, you're so uncomfortable that you want to go back to your comfort zone. So I'd go, for me, when I stopped drinking, I'd go 2-3 hours. Like I'd set a timer for myself on my phone. For the next 2 hours, you're not going to drink, right? And then I make those 2 hours and I say, all right, can I get another 2 hours in? Can I get another 2 hours in? Can I get another 4 hours in? And I make it, let's say, a whole day. And the next morning I'd wake up and just natural habit, I get up and I go to the store and I buy me something to drink. And I find myself just like, what the heck are you doing? Sometimes I would drink it. And even when I drank it, I felt this guilt and shame. I felt this feeling of like, dude, you messed up. And I had to start switching that because that was in itself a problem. Because when I felt the guilt and I felt the shame from a slip up, a habit that I had built that I was still participating in, I was like, there's no point. There's no use. You know, those thoughts of just like, you ain't Jack, you ain't somebody who's gonna do this. Like that's what I would feel. And I had to start shifting that to be like, Nico, you just did 24 hours, bro. Nico, you just did 18 hours without drinking. That's awesome. Okay, you slipped up, but can you do maybe 26 hours this time? Can you push yourself just a little bit further this time? Yes, you slipped up. Yes, you messed up, but look how far you came compared to where you were at. You couldn't function without using. You couldn't function without drinking. You couldn't function without these things. So look, dude, you did good. And that was the way that I had to shift my thought process around my slip ups because they would happen, right? I remember even going back to my heroin days. I went 60 days without using heroin. And I was like, oh, I'm good to go. I could use it again and I won't have a problem. That's how dumb I was about it. When I used again, I felt the guilt, the shame, the regret. And I had to remind myself, Nico, you did 60 days. Can you do 90 days this time? When I was drinking, alcohol, heroin withdrawals made me feel like I was going to die. Alcohol almost killed me. I remember being in the hospital because I had a seizure at work. I remember waking up in the hospital and I had defecated myself. I remember having to call the nurse because I was just like, yo, like this is what happened. I remember when they let me out, they released me from the hospital, but my first thing was to go get something to drink. Those were the big moments that I had to remind myself about when I slipped up. When I slipped up, I had to remind myself, Nico, do you remember that you were in the hospital? Eventually, Luke, I needed to get both my hips replaced because of the damage that I had done. So even now, when I have those urges, those thoughts come into my mind, I still remind myself, Nico, you went through 2 surgeries. Nico, you remember waking up in the hospital. Nico, you remember waking up with lumps on your head, bruises on your body from seizures that you've had. So even now, when I'm tempted to slip up, because it's an ongoing process, right? It's never a set in stone, you're good to go. I remember those time frames, and that keeps me from slipping up. So those are the 2 ways that I kind of address slip ups. Is I think about, hey, you know what? If I do slip up, look how far you've already came. Because in your early stages, it's going to happen. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about relapse, but relapse does happen. I would say within the first 18 months, you're probably going to relapse a couple times. And this isn't a way to promote it, but it's a way to acknowledge it and then push yourself further than you did last time because you're training. You're training yourself into a new way. You're not trying to stay sober. You're just training. You're training and you're training. So if you can make it one day, cool. You slip up, you know what? It happens. Can you make it a day and a half? Can you make it 2 days? And then use that same process. Weeks turn into months turns into years. And you now have this resiliency built inside of you. So measuring backwards is one of the best ways to address a slip up when it's happened. And then a way to avoid a slip up when it's might be happening is by remembering and recalling to yourself some of the low moments that you've had. Your brain wants to give pleasure or solve a problem, and alcohol and drinking is a solution to both of that. It solves the emotional problem that you're having, and it gives you some sort of pleasure. So if you can remind your mind of, hey, you know what? Yeah, there might have been some pleasure, but do you remember all this other pain that it caused? Do you remember all these other problems that it caused? Your mind tends to be like, oh yeah, we can't do that anymore. And so you get to retrain it to avoid a slip up going forward.
And as we come towards the end, Nico, is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Anything that you feel like you want to sign out with?
Yeah, you know what? Sip some tea. One of the things that I've created in my programs, in my writing, in my videos is T is an acronym for your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. So drink some tea. When you're not feeling the best, drink some tea. Address what you're thinking, address what you're feeling, and then you'll be able to address your different actions. So that's one of the best tips I can give anybody. And you know what? If it's okay, Luke, they can reach out to me, anybody on your platform, however they need to. On social medias, it's at No Halo NM. And on YouTube, there's videos that I put out every day for just these thought processes. Because my goal is just to make sure that people can have additional resources and support whenever they're, whatever stage they're going through.
Yeah, and you also have a book, right? 5 Things to Know Before You Get Sober. That's on Amazon, so people can go and find that as well. And we'll put all of your links down to the description. Any other places they should go? Anything else you want to sort of leave them with before we sign out?
Yeah, man. Last thing I would leave them with is you weren't created to be a perfect little angel. You were created to do better today. That's all you got to do. Is do better today than you did yesterday.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.